For the past 8 years, my colleagues and I have been working hard to try to discover a solution to transform struggling communities to ones of health and opportunity. Combined with my own 20 years of experience, it has been a journey that we believe we have found a solution. But that solution is going to require a significant amount of courage on behalf of us as individuals and as a city. Though the solutions are complex, there's one particular idea that I believe is worth indulging. That idea is the power that lies in proximity. But let me start from the beginning. Growing up in the suburbs in the 80s meant that I was raised in a predominantly middle-class white community where, honestly, there's very few that look different from me. But all the while, my parents did a great job for their time of exposing me to the suffering around us. It was not uncommon that we would have somebody in our home that had fallen on hard times, and they'd stay with us and we'd support them until they got back on their feet. All the while, honestly, my parents would often struggle to keep a roof over our own head and food on our own table. But despite those experiences, when I look back, I never really doubted my ability to succeed. I rarely doubted my ability to be whatever I wanted to be. I rarely doubted my ability to obtain the American dream. Following high school, I fell in love and got married to a wonderful, amazing young lady who, to be honest, makes being married a pretty easy proposition. But she happens to be Puerto Rican. And in the 90s, in this city, being interracially married was quite rare. But it was this decision that would be the first in my journey of many that would help me understand the power that truly is in proximity. As the years that followed, I began to really have my eyes open to the very real fact that my experiences were not the same as her experiences, and that the assumptions that others were making of me were not the same as the assumptions that they were making of her. But despite those differences, we were united in a very real passion to serve others and to advance the lives of the vulnerable. So, compelled by leaders of our faith like Mother Teresa and Bill Wilson, we really concluded rapidly that in order to have the most impact, where we lived had to be part of that equation. And so we bought our first home in one of the more marginalized neighborhoods in our city, and we got to work. My wife became a school teacher at the local elementary school, and together we visited the homes of every child, we visited every home of every child in her classroom. And we sat for hours listening to the stories that were told by these families about their hopes and dreams for their kids. As time went on, we maintained connections with those families, and we added new families. Before we knew it, we were surrounded by people from all walks of life, people who had real need and were experiencing real suffering, people who were living afraid as a result of a lack of legal status in this country, and who are forced to live in a shadow economy that requires great work for very little pay. People who were surrounded by poor public amenities that were dramatically different than their more well-off peers just a mile away. Well, those people became our friends. And I found myself standing in the middle of two very different worlds. On one hand, the world of the friends in my neighborhood, and then on the other, the world of the friends like whom I grew up with. The living in proximity taught me the power of exchange. Meet my friend Jose. Jose came from a humble background, and he works extremely hard, doing great landscaping work. Jose is the father of 4, and together with his wife, works diligently to ensure that their children and their family have what they need and the supports they need to be successful, despite the odds in my community. One day, I asked Jose to build us a beautiful garden. And upon completion, we would have folks regularly coming over to our home and complimenting on such great work. And with excitement, I would tell them about his work and encourage them to think about hiring Jose to do a garden for them. But inevitably, almost always, the question would come. That question, is he cheap? It was then that I began to understand through this experience and many others that followed the power that is in exchange and my role in it. You see, Jose is a friend. And this time, that conversation is personal. I can tell you from then on, we have chosen that every time that we're going to hire somebody from our neighborhood, we're paying them what they're worth. The power of proximity has helped me to discover the effects of segregation. In our neighborhood, as a child, the odds of you graduating, much less graduating from a great school, is extremely low. What we understand from the data is that the effects of concentrated poverty creates toxic stressors within a child that inhibits their physical growth, motor skill development, social emotional well-being. But let's be really candid here. Can we for a moment? These neighborhoods did not come about in a vacuum. They did not somehow magically appear. These neighborhoods are fundamentally created and sustained by the decisions of those of us of means and power choosing to invest that means and power away from those without. I can no better demonstrate that than in this map. So what you're seeing here in this map is an interesting set of data that shows the average income of a household today of an adult in their mid-30s tracked all the way back to the neighborhood by which they came. So what you're seeing here is that if you grew up in a neighborhood in the dark red, your average household income in your 30s right now is between $10,000 and $20,000 a year. $10,000 and $20,000. If you're from one of the blue neighborhoods, it's on the opposite end of the spectrum, between $90,000 and $100,000 a year. The disparity here is clear. And the American dream for children growing up in those red neighborhoods is all but fleeting, if not completely run away. Living in proximity has taught me the power of connections and of network. Deanna was a student from our neighborhood. She worked hard. She got into one of the best high schools in our city, ranked at the top of her class there, and then proceeded to qualify to get into one of the top universities. But the problem, Deanna is a DACA student. And if you're not aware, DACA stands for Deferred Action for Childhood Arrival. And it's an Obama administration initiative to provide avenues for employment for thousands of adults who entered into this country without documentation. Why is that important? Well, DACA students don't qualify for any federal aid and very little private aid, which means that students like Deanna are getting a fraction of the aid that far lesser qualified peers are getting. But true to the spirit of this young lady, she moved forward anyway. And by the midway through her second year, she confided in me that the pressure and challenges of making ends meet and studying hard were really mounting. And she was considering to pause her education and consider other options, putting years of hard work by she and her family at risk. Well, it just so happened that 2 days later, I had an unrelated meeting scheduled with the president of that university. And during that meeting, I was sharing with the president how out of reach and out of context this university was to our community. And even though that university sat right in the middle of our community. To my surprise, he reached out to this young lady and offered her financial support much more in line with what she deserves. Today, Deanna's getting ready to graduate. And though the future is uncertain, I am convinced that if given the opportunity, this young lady will change the world. But the importance of this story is not my role in it. I didn't do anything special. No, I didn't pull any strings. I didn't wave any magic wands. All I simply did was communicated to somebody a wrong that he had the power to make right. No, this story is about her and the hard work and dedication that she demonstrated for years and years, only to not be rewarded for what she deserved. You see, proximity provides the avenue for relationship. And when we push in and get close enough, We begin to understand the impacts that our decisions have on the everyday lives of people. We begin to understand the real power that we have to promote justice, which is also the flip side of the same power that we have to continue segregation. But if you make that choice, if you choose to live in community, and if you choose to live among the vulnerable, I want to be very clear that the value goes both ways. Because when the storms of life come, and I can tell you they have come, it was my community that was strong when I was weak. And I can tell you no better story than this. Last year, my daughter's house caught fire. And as I arrived to the scene, and the fire was engulfing the home, and I looked, and my daughter was draped over her steering wheel and weeping. When the fire was put out, we walked through the home to assess the damage, and as the last fire truck was leaving, we found ourselves standing next to my car, and I was beginning to think about what else needed to be done, what was next. I needed to secure the home, I needed to make it safe, and it was getting dark, and I was feeling overwhelmed and alone. It's just then when I turned to look at the house, and I realized, to my surprise, that it had already been boarded up. It had already been secured. And I saw in the dark a gentleman who was putting the last screw and the last piece of plywood on the last window. It was Jose. What will it take? What will it take to transform struggling communities to ones of opportunity? First, it's understanding that we have the power to stop the bleeding. Second, it's understanding that we need to come alongside those that we're struggling to serve and let them teach us how best to help. And if we do that, I'm convinced that we can replicate what we're seeing in our neighborhood, that the economy is returning, that schools are beginning to improve, and that vitality is coming back like I've never seen, but not just for the neighborhood, but for ourselves. And if you make that choice, we will truly make a difference. But the real question is, will we have the courage? Will we have the courage to get close enough to let it affect us? Thank you.